This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Xcast X-Files Podwatch. This is episode 90 of our look back at the X-Files as we get ready for and await season 11 coming in 2018. Today we're covering Salvage and Badlaa. I'm your host, Carl Sweeney, and I'm joined again by Andrew Blaker. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Carl.
Andrew, before we get into these two, I'm interested on your thoughts on the 8th season as a whole, because I know it's kind of a divisive season still amongst the fans. I think it's a good season. I like it, but what do you think?
Yeah, season 8's underrated. It really is. It has some strong episodes. It was bound to be criticized. I mean, you have Mulder in only half of the episodes, and some of those episodes he's only in a scene. So, you get a very different character in John Doggett. But I think that there's a lot to appreciate here. I will say, I think in terms of the myth arc, you have a very tight and pretty well executed myth arc running through this season. It's fairly, I think, consistent within the season, and they take it in some pretty new and interesting directions with Mulder being gone. So I think it's definitely worth checking out. I think it's got some really good parts to it.
Yeah, I wonder if season 8 and 9 get kind of conflated in people's minds a lot of the time. I think the criticism of season 9 is very justified, but I think sometimes the two sort of run together in people's minds because they're the two sort of Doggett seasons, basically.
They do. I think I've heard from a lot of people who, will do podcasts or talk about the show, and they say, well, I've never seen seasons 8 or 9. Which, I mean, it can't really blame them. I mean, it was a significant drop in the ratings, and Mulder was gone for most of season 8 and virtually all of season 9. And, Gillian Anderson was seen a lot less in season 9. And, it did kind of go in different directions. So I can understand that, but I do think they get conflated to be, they just get all written off because they're different.
All right, well, let's look at these two episodes specifically. The first one is Salvage. This was broadcast in January of 2001, as was Badlaa. So Salvage is the 9th episode of the 8th season. It was written by Jeffrey Bell and directed by Rod Hardy. This is the episode in which Doggett and Scully investigate a man, apparently made of metal, who is hunting down his creators. Well, having said that, I like season 8 a lot and everything. I'm not fond of this little stretch here, specifically Shorekill, which we talked about yesterday. I talked about that with Baz Greenland. And now Salvage. I think they're the two weakest episodes of the season. Some of the Doggett-Scully standalones are a bit of a problem in the season. Some of them are brilliant, and then some of them are a bit anonymous and almost redundant. But what do you think of Salvage?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the weaker episodes of the season. I would not rate it up there with great episodes by any means. I agree with you. Shorekill, and I'll throw Salvage in there, are two fairly insignificant. I won't say they're terrible. I'll just say they're not noteworthy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the standalones that kick off the season, Patience, Roadrunners, Via Negativa, I think what the series does really well is analyse what the new status quo, Mulder's absence, means for the characters as we go forward. Mm-hmm. And then you get into some of these episodes, like Salvage, which don't really do that, and it's just like an X-Files episode without Mulder, but with Scully, alongside Doggett, and without that focus on the characters that the other episodes have, it just doesn't do much for me, I'm afraid. Despite the fact I really like Doggett as a character. I think he was a great addition to the series, actually. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is quite weak. This takes place in your home state of Indiana, so maybe just talk to me for a minute. How well did they capture?
It looks just like it does here. No, it was. It takes place in Muncie, Indiana, which is about 20 to 30 minutes from where I live, actually. And it's. You can probably say the same for what everyone said about Vancouver. LA can double as many things. I mean, mostly you get interior scenes and a junkyard and a street view for this episode, so you can say it takes place anywhere. But it is kind of cool to see, a town that you are very familiar with actually on there. I think it's not the only episode in Indiana, because the Postmodern Prometheus took place in Indiana. a fictional town, but
yeah, kind of a fairy tale version of Indiana, or a comic book version of it.
Yeah,
or something.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I didn't really get a strong sense of place from this episode or anything. I just noticed that it was set in Indiana, so I thought I'd ask you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. You mentioned earlier about the ratings. I pulled up a quote from Robert Patrick, and he seemed to be getting comfortable in the role about this time, from what we can gather. And he talked about how, by about the point this episode came in, he says the numbers were good and everyone was happy. So I think there'd been this kind of gradual decline in the ratings, actually from as far back as the 5th season. And then I think it may have been down a little bit in the 8th season, but it was more or less holding steady. And then actually that final stretch, when Mulder's back, I think it sort of compared very well with like the final third of season 7,
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you get to season 9, you have a real drop off, which has been attributed to a number of things. Yeah, so Robert Patrick, it's nice to think that, he's getting happier in the role. I think he's an actor that it always looked like he was giving everything he had, whereas I know people slag off David Duchovny. I think he's a very good actor too, but people talk about how his commitment waned a bit over time, and there are some episodes where he's not got a very good script and his performances are a bit flat and he looks a bit uninterested, but I never got that sense from Robert Patrick, really.
No, he's a great actor, and like I said, I like the character of Doggett, and I think he brought kind of something new and different, and they used him to take the mythology in some different directions. So I'm a fan of Doggett and Robert Patrick, and I felt like he, in terms of his performances, he's very consistent throughout the season.
Yeah. It's a real shame that he's almost been airbrushed out of X-Files history in a way. I don't think we've heard anything about him since The Truth, but maybe that will change in the new season. We'll find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously he was getting more comfortable, and they also drop in like a Terminator 2 reference here, or a very veiled reference to it when they're talking about this metal man, and is it Doggett says something about, that only happens in the movies or something?
Yeah.
Which, it's I can kind of live without the kind of wink stuff, but I suppose it's only one line. But what did you think about this guy then? He's called Ray Pierce, I think, in the episode. They're kind of the antagonist, or however you want to say it, the metal man. What did you think of him?
Well, I thought he was an okay character. He's basically getting revenge for what led to him being the middleman. I thought as a character, he was reasonably sympathetic, considering all that happened to him. And that was probably, one of the things that stood out to me of the episode. Good character, and not a terrible story either, I don't think. I was engaged in the episode, and I thought it was, an engaging enough story. I don't know. I guess it just didn't... It's not particularly memorable, maybe, and it just doesn't hold in my mind.
Yeah, sometimes it's quite hard to work out exactly why they don't click, because sometimes like the pieces are there, but they just don't gel for whatever reason. Because I think this one's quite well made, like you say, the acting sort of does the job. I think that at this point of the season, a lot of people, when you consider this in the context of the season as a whole, people are getting a bit, anxious for Mulder's return at this point, possibly, because he's in the majority of episodes, 12 out of 21. Although, like you said, some of them are only for very brief appearances.
Right.
So it's been a while since we've got a good helping of Mulder. So that's coming up fairly soon. But yeah, maybe episode placement. What do you think?
Yeah, a little bit. One thing I think is interesting to note, I could be wrong about this, but I feel like, when you look at the plot, it's a guy who was basically engineered to be, his cellular makeup was changed to be that of metal, and I feel like that kind of precedes the whole super soldier line. It's not a Mythark episode by any means, but if you think of it that way, we're looking for the positives here. I think that is an interesting bent. I have no idea if that influenced Chris Carter or not in the direction that they took, but it's kind of an interesting, you see almost like a precursor to the fact that, they blame it on Gulf War syndrome, but really there was a company that was behind this, and I just thought it kind of tied in, interestingly enough. It's a reach, but, it's...
Yeah, the Gulf War aspects, that could have been developed more, I think. I thought that was quite interesting. They've done, army veterans and so on before, haven't they? Mm-hmm. So they maybe didn't want to retread things too much.
I do feel, though, like you asked, the middle of the season. This is a few episodes in before David Duchovny's back, pretty much, for the rest of the season. So season 8's a mixed bag for me, because you have some really good episodes early, you have some really good episodes to close out the season, and then you've got a few sprinkled in the middle that to me are a little more memorable than others. So it's very much kind of a mixed bag, in my opinion, what you get.
Yeah, I think it's just that stretch where I really like the stuff where, the stuff that kicks off the season and Doggett and Scully sort of sounding each other out. I think then when you get they're a bit more comfortable with each other, and you get the more sort of straightforward episodes where the interest is primarily in the case. I think some of those episodes aren't quite up to scratch, So this one and Shawkill are the biggest offenders, but I think that's the problem. I think if I was watching season 8 again, I'd probably just cut out Shawkill and Salvage and keep all the rest, maybe. But hey. Jeffrey Bell wrote this episode. He probably wrote, I'm not sure exactly how many, he wrote a handful of episodes over the run of the series, and he seemed to alternate between, I don't know, he did some dodgy standalones. So this one and Alpha, I think, was one of his. Yeah, but he's also did, I think he did the Rain King and the Goldberg variation. So it seemed like he was on more sort of safer ground with the more whimsical stuff. I don't know. Maybe that was more up his alley, I guess. I don't know. So, Badlaa was written by John Shiban, directed by Tony Warmby. This is the episode that begins with a very overweight man dying a bloody death shortly after a trip to India, and a paraplegic beggar appears to be involved. This is a very memorable episode. It's got some very vivid imagery that's hard to shake. I think this is one that sticks with you, I think. What do you reckon about Badlaa, Andrew?
Well, this is the infamous butt genie episode. Yeah. That's not my term. That's a fan term. But yes, it's certainly memorable. The network actually, when this came out, I believe they had to kind of downplay some of the plot details because if you were to describe in correct but graphic detail how the monster gets himself around, and gets inside the victims, you're looking at some, practices and standards. And
well, yeah, that's an interesting point. That's Chris Carter's input, supposedly. So John Shiban came to Carter with the idea of somebody crawling inside somebody's ear, and Carter said, "Actually, do you know what would be even more memorable?" And then the butt genie was born as a consequence.
There you go.
Whatever you think about it, I mean, we talked about Salvage, and that guy Ray Pierce, for example. I have trouble remembering him, and I only watched the episode, a few days ago. But if I see the word Badlaa, it just conjures up the memories of the guy on the trolley, and the sound of the squeaking wheels. So,
oh yeah,
whatever else you want to say about it, it really does stick with you. It really does create a memorable episode of television.
Yes. It does. I really like this episode. I think it set out to be creepy. I think it set out to be gross and disturbing, and that's exactly what you get. And the story may not be the strongest, but I think it's atmospheric and it is very creepy. And they got Deep Roy to play the part of the beggar / butt genie, and He's a stunt man. He's played a number of roles. He did a character in Return of the Jedi in the Star Wars franchise, and he's done a lot. And I mean this completely as a compliment, but he's a creepy looking guy, and he's the only one that could have done this part.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will remember him as the Oompa Loompas in Tim Burton's remake of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as well.
That's right, yeah.
Like you said, the story maybe doesn't always hang together. There's still aspects of the plot that I found a bit confusing, and some of the stuff with the kids I wasn't as into. But yeah, somehow it just creeps up on you. I don't know. You don't always need every aspect of an episode to be perfect or to be brilliantly executed when you've got some other aspects that are very strong, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah, and like I said, I think it wins points for being, so creepy and so atmospheric, and the opening sequence especially is it's really well done, and it really does set the tone for what the next, 40 some minutes are going to be.
Yeah, I think some people have had criticisms of the depiction of India and some of the kind of like the racial sensitivities of the episode.
Yeah, I'm sure they have. Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, in reality, they're shooting on a soundstage, and so I think to service the plot, I mean, you have an Indian beggar as your primary antagonist, so I can see how they're going to probably exaggerate the situation over there for dramatic effect. Absolutely.
Kind of in the lineage, I guess, of episodes like Teleco, for example, where you get somebody coming over from a West African country, and those episodes sometimes I think you could level charges of insensitivity at the X-Files for some of those reasons, but I think it's worth noting anyway. This is the final appearance of Chuck Burks in the series.
Yes, it is. Chuck.
Kind of one of those strange recurring characters who, I don't know, I mean, he probably appeared, I'm not sure exactly, maybe half a dozen times over the run of the series, and he's in stuff like Hollywood AD. He's not quite the same as the Lone Gunman, but he's of their ilk, isn't he? Kind of a quirky character that Mulder turns to for a bit of expertise. And
yeah, definitely. I think it's, he's one of those, he pops up every so often, and you're like, oh, him,
You're not really missing him too much when he's not there, but you're always pleased to see him when he does turn up, I think. Yeah, so significant because it's his last appearance. What did you think about the whole, Scully trying to be Mulder side of things in this episode? Because I think that's kind of the experience her character's going through here.
I felt like in this episode, I really liked the ending where Scully breaks down after shooting. At first it seems like she's shooting the little boy, and it does turn out to be the beggar wounding him. I thought that was really well played by Gillian Anderson, and the kind of tying into the whole Mulder's missing idea. I thought that was a nice touch. Maybe a little out of place, maybe thematically it's not the most consistent, but I really liked how it ended with her doing what she did, and basically she's forced into this Mulder role. I mean, and this happens. She's very reluctant about it, but it happens in multiple season 8 episodes where, she's doing what Mulder had to do for years, trying to convince Doggett that, not to disregard superstition and the paranormal so quickly as she did.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing for the series, actually, because, I mean, in some season 6 and season 7 episodes, I think the old sort of skeptic-believer dynamic gets stretched probably beyond breaking points at times, One that comes to mind is the beginning, the first episode after the movie, where I find Scully a bit hard to take in that episode at the beginning, where they've been to the Antarctic and she's kind of still the same way. But anyway, the Butt Genie. Then, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's anyone that comes along later that kind of rivals him as a memorable monster or a memorable antagonist. I'm not really sure. This may be the last really good monster of the original series.
For me, I'm hard. I can't really think of any like in season 9 that stand out as creepy and truly. I mean, he is human, but almost has this supernatural ability. I don't remember any that stand out as much as this one does.
No, I'm a bit surprised. When they make the figures and stuff. I mean, you always get the Fluke Man and Tombs, but we've never had a Butt Genie action figure.
I know.
Yeah, maybe one day. Who knows?
Maybe one of those pop vinyl figures. With squeaky wheels on a cart.
Yeah, it comes with a little trolley. Yeah, that'd be good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so cheers, Andrew. Tomorrow on the Xcast X-Files Podwatch, we will continue towards the end of the series. And next up is The Gift and Medusa. So The Gift will see the return of Mulder in a fashion. In the meantime, find us on Twitter @the_X_cast. Find us on Facebook, type in Xcast, and you can find our page and our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast Podcast Fan Group. Until next time, though, trust no one.